The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
In the course of his teaching, Jesus said to the crowds, "Beware of the scribes who like to go around in long robes and accept greetings in the marketplaces, seats of honor in synagogues, places of honor at banquets. They devour the houses of widows and, as a pretext, recite lengthy prayers." He sat down opposite the treasury and observed how the crowd put money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow also came and put in 2 small coins worth a few cents. Calling his disciples to himself, he said to them, "Amen, I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all the other contributors to the treasury. For they have all contributed from their surplus wealth. But she, from her poverty, has contributed all she had, her whole livelihood." The Gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. Today, we reflect on the faith of 2 widows. These widows are at the center of our first reading from the first book of Kings and our gospel from Mark. These widows in these readings give us examples of a faith in God that we should notice, reflect on, and learn from. Let's start with some background on the life of a widow at the time of these readings. A widow did not have inheritance rights. Without an inheritance, a widow was very vulnerable. When widowed, a woman was, by and large, dependent on her children and family to care for her. A widow was dependent for her food, clothing, shelter, the very basic necessities of life. If a family was not present, a widow was truly poor. She would have to depend on public charity, with maybe some help from friends. She might be able to scrape together a little money, a coin or 2, if fortunate. The life of a widow was not easy. In our first reading, God sent the prophet Elijah to Zarephath, a place located in the heart of Gentile territory. The widow that Elijah encountered was Gentile, a sign that Yahweh's salvation would be for all people, not just the chosen people of Israel. This widow was particularly vulnerable and in dire straits. It was a time of drought and famine. Her food was running out. She was getting ready to prepare a final meal for herself and her son. Still, Elijah asked the widow to give him something to eat before she prepared her final meal. This is a puzzling request, one that you might not expect. But Elijah told her, "Do not be afraid, for the Lord, the God of Israel, says, the jar of flour shall not go empty, nor the jug of oil run dry." She did as Elijah asked. she prepared for him a little cake and then something for herself and her son. And her jar of flour did not go empty, and her jug of oil did not run dry. The widow and her son had food for a year. How did this happen? The prophet Elisha had faith in God. It was through his faith that he was able to ask the widow to give from her poverty everything she had, her last meal. But more amazingly, this poor widow also had faith. She had faith in a God that was not even her God. She was not afraid to part with what little she had. Because of their faith, God did as he promised. God blessed this widow. In our gospel, Jesus watched the crowd in the temple make their money offerings at the treasury. Everyone knew how much each person contributed by the clinking sound that each coin made as was dropped into the treasury coffers. Jesus observed that many rich people put in large sums, but the poor widow came up and put in only 2 small coins, not worth very much, just a few cents. Jesus told his disciples, "This poor widow put into the treasury more than all the other contributors. For the rich had contributed from their surplus to be noticed, but the poor widow had contributed from her poverty, everything she had, her whole livelihood, in humility." Like the widow in the first reading, this poor widow in the gospel had faith in God also. These widows in these readings give us examples of a faith in God that we should notice, reflect on, and learn from. These widows were not possessive of that last meal or that last few coins. We might think they should have kept what they had. They surely needed it themselves. But in a spirit of detachment that comes from their faith in God, these widows are not possessive. They think nothing of giving away what they had. These widows did not give from their surplus. They had no surplus. They gave from their substance and then from their poverty. This is counter to the world's view. What's the right thing to do? It makes us stop and think about how we handle our own treasures, the riches that God has given to you and me, however great or small that might be. Jesus does not say in the gospel it is wrong to be rich. We can be rich in the talents and charisms we have. These are gifts from God. We can be rich by virtue of the money or material possessions we have. These are gifts from God. We can be rich by the power and influence we have. These also are gifts from God. The list of what God has given to us is endless, as his love for us is endless. We are called to return God's love by loving him and our neighbor. Our faith in God will give us the direction we need to do the right thing with the riches and the things God has given us. We are warned in our gospel to not go around like the scribes in long robes who use their riches for the sake of being noticed, for seats and places of honor, because they think they are somebody. Instead, we should follow the example of the poor widows by not being possessive of our riches, looking at our riches in a spirit of humility and detachment, giving from our substance in a spirit of poverty. It is from a spirit of poverty that we stop thinking about ourselves and focusing on the needs of others. Are not the poor widows a model of Christ for us? They gave everything they had and then some. Did not Jesus give everything he had for us? In our second reading from Hebrews, we read, "So also Christ offered once to take away the sins of many." For our sakes, Jesus became poor for us. Jesus died for us that we might have salvation. Let's get this right. Let's do the right thing. In the Catechism, it says, detachment from our riches is necessary for entrance into the kingdom of heaven. Let us be poor in spirit. Let us have a faith in God that he provides for our needs, both physically and spiritually. If we turn to him, giving all that we have, with our whole mind, our whole heart, our whole soul, we shall be blessed by him.